So I am just so excited to be again presenting with John. John has been the savior of Social Sciences Week while I've had to run around the world. But at the same time, to present with John and Susan is such a treat. And the joke that I always say is, for my entire academic career, I have treated John and Susan like my academic parents, but I've treated them like divorced academic parents. So when John says to me, Will, this is a horrible idea, do not do it, I immediately run to Susan and say, Susan, John told me not to do this. And Susan says, go ahead and do it, Will. And I get my way and get to do whatever I want. Um, so it's so funny that over the last year and a half, we have just so aligned on experiential learning. We've been diving deep into philosophy and really nerding out about these old ideas. And so it's just been a real treat. But Susan, I will pass to you to do an acknowledgement and also introduce yourself to some of the people that might not have known you.
Okay, thanks, Will. Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here in this seminar. I am a First Nations Māori woman from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I want to acknowledge the fact that I'm here living and working and studying as part of the settler community on the First Nations lands of the Gundungurra and Daru peoples of the Blue Mountains, and in a town called Katoomba. So I'm beaming into you from Katoomba. And incidentally, John is also from this particular area as well. So I want to also acknowledge the First Nations lands on which the Charles Sturt campuses are located that pertain to the cultural caretakers of those lands, the Wiradjuri, the Ngunnawal, the Gundungurra and Biripi peoples of Australia. I also pay respects on behalf of my colleagues to their elders, past, present, and those who are emerging into this space, because they are the true holders, the custodians of the knowledges of those lands. They are the ones that are going to tell us, advise us of the correct relationships and connectivity that all animate and inanimate beings have within this cosmos. And I also pay genuine respects to First Nations Australians in this space today, because we have to recognise that they come from a quite different place of displacement than any other group, any other ethnicity group coming to Australia today. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Susan. Oh, Will, your microphone's, that's very unusual for Will.
Sorry, that was technologically unadvanced. Sorry. Was it unusual for me to not be talking or just, no, I'm just
I
kidding.
did not have the microphone on.
Yeah, no. So one of the things John and I talked about earlier today was just really going over some of the context of this presentation. And as the three of us are social workers, we thought about some of the context of these ideas. And we think that understanding the context of where we're coming from as we approach our work as social work educators and researchers, we also think that we shouldn't be limited by this to social work or to research or to academia, that hopefully you can take these ideas into other aspects of any work that all of us do in thinking about experience, thinking about learning, thinking about professional development and things like that. John, do you want to get going on some of these ideas really quickly?
Yeah, I think also to place us in a bit of a context, we're going to talk a fair bit in the end around our intensives program, intensive schools, because that's where we really spend a lot of time with the people, with the students of the degree. That's where we get to meet them face to face and are able to have to kind of practice ideas of experiential learning. And so hopefully we'll go through ideas around this is mainly I must say most of my ideas, or a lot of my ideas, come from Susan. She gives me books and she says things to me, and then it's like 100 years later they sink in and I go, oh my God, I get it. Yeah. So hopefully we'll get into notions of especially praxis, because thinking about like doing, then reflecting on what we have done. And a thing that Susan often says, you can't reflect alone. So this is what we often do within our social work degree, and especially within the intensive schools, is that we do particular things, we look at concepts, we try things, such as counseling skills or group work skills, and then we reflect on them. And then this is around ideas extended also to the pedagogy of discomfort, that we can move out of, not out of a safe place, but out of a note that we are extending ourselves from our comfortable position and deliberately practicing. And Will is much more skilled around talking about deliberate practice, but
Well, with deliberate practice, what we're kind of thinking is actually, and I think we've borrowed the word practice from medicine, where we say, this is my practice, instead of thinking of it as, what am I actually working on? What am I practicing? What am I getting better at doing? So deliberate practice doesn't mean intentional social work practice in the way that we think of it, but it's really thinking about, how can I be together with students, with educators, with everybody, and take away from the experience in, what did I learn about myself? What does that mean about me as the social worker, and how I can be better as a social worker tomorrow? So that's sort of what we think about. And pedagogy of discomfort, John and I are going to talk about this a bit later, but I don't think that means just do everything you can to be uncomfortable. As with the theme of outdoor therapies, it can turn into, oh, you're scared of heights, let me give you heights, I'll teach you how to be uncomfortable. What it really means in the pedagogy of discomfort is, why am I uncomfortable with a certain idea, and what does that mean, and how can I lean into what that means for me? So, for instance, John doesn't really love solution-focused brief therapy. I do. And so we can lean into the discomfort that we both have with each other around this discussion. And that leads to new meaning, a new construction of ideas, by getting into what we like, don't like, disagree with. So that really is all about that conversational learning, as well.
Yeah, so hopefully as we look at the next bunch of slides, we're going to look at the different theorists and how they've influenced how we think about our approach to, we're going to say social work education, but it would be in regards to any education, really.
Mm.
And teaching around the whole experience, not just the parts you think are teaching. We're going to look at some switching around, thinking, well, things that we did that were extracurricular, and bring them back into they're actually teaching too, because they're part of the experience. We are there as part of that experience.
Mm.
Another notion I picked up, and we'll go into it more, from Miles Horton, was showing up without the fear of not knowing, thinking about turning up to a teaching situation where you don't know everything, and just deal with that kind of well, as we talk about it, there's no need to turn up with fear, because you're turning up to a situation where other people have their own knowledge of situations. So it's a learning from each other. So going to really think about those ideas from Paulo Freire, thinking about the teacher, the learner, the teacher, as a kind of a circular approach to the experience of education. and thinking that there is no empty vessel there to fill. So we don't come along, as Paul Freire says, where we're the bank and we deposit knowledge into people and they take it away only from what we drip feed them. That is not the true experience of education. It's more, or what we're thinking, it's more around the experience that we have together, that we build the knowledge that makes sense to our contextual situation and what we need from our education.
And one of the things I put up in the first bullet point, this word generalist, because it's thrown around in curriculum all the time. And I think it's kind of it's almost a silly word, because we have people who show up to our social work intensives having 20 years of work experience. Why are they going to learn a generalist thing? And we have people with no experience in the human services, but maybe they grew up in a pub and watched hospitality occur their entire lives. And that is such amazing experience to bring into, so bringing the lived experience into the practice, into the education, to get the most out of bringing the use of self into everything. And one of the funny things, we talk about use of self all the time in social work education, and then we're also the therapeutic helping professions are the quickest to manualize everything. So it's like, great, be yourself, but only if you follow this manual. So it can be contradictory of what we're trying to say. And so yeah, so we're really thinking about bringing the self really to everything and being together and learning with each other, not necessarily from each other, but in the conversations together. All
Which
right.
I guess too, Will, is a reflection on what we have done together, you, myself, and Susan, and others, in our conversations about our learning and teaching. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what's interesting is none of these are new ideas at all. In fact, no one who is informing us right now about these ideas is alive. So they're very old ideas. And John and I was joking about this with Susan and John before this presentation. One thing we always forget is, definitely I consider one of my superheroes Jane Addams. In that top right picture, that's the first woman to win a Nobel Peace Prize, and she had a summer camp. She worked for in Chicago and was considered intellectual soulmates with John Dewey, who's the very square looking person in the suit right below her picture, who's considered one of the gurus of experiential learning, the philosophy of experiential learning. John, do you want to talk a bit about Miles Horton and Paulo Freire and the book that lends itself to the title of our presentation as well?
Yeah, and that's right. And yet again, to not take credit, this book was handed to me by Susan. And
Yes.
I don't know. I think, Susan, you sometimes give me things without an explanation, and then I understand when I get involved, so yeah, reading this book, I didn't know anything about Miles Horton, in a sense, a little bit about Paul Freire, but there's there was just some really good takeaways. Especially I'm thinking around the title, We Make the Road by Walking. Like throughout the book, it's kind of a conversation about, in one way, like what I took away from it is that you don't have to know everything when you go into a situation. The people you work with, they want something, they want some form of knowledge or need some form of knowledge. So that knowledge has to be, or the learning has to be approached together, and it has to be contextualized to the understanding of the people and the environment. So it's no use trying to teach something outside of the particular context that they need or understand, because kind of has to be interesting or useful to the person in a way. I was just thinking before we started this, like you can be told something like 2 and 2 is 4 as a child or whatever, and it's kind of an abstract concept. But if someone gives you 2 apples and 2 more, you kind of know what 4 apples is, you know, and you might actually have an experiential sense of what 4 is. Especially because if you have 2 apples, you can give 2 of them to 2 friends and you've still got the 2. And you can give 1 more away and you still have 1. So it's very something you can really hold, think about, and it's within your own life. And I've kind of thought about some of those ideas. Well, that's what seems to have come out of my reading of the book, and also humanizing, like taking away the barrier of teacher learner and more of a togetherness in the process. Well, the teacher as facilitator, I guess, is the closest notion. So that's just some simple things I've gotten from that. Well, what about yourself, Susan? What do you?
And well, I was just going to say on the right is also Edward Lindemann, who is really a guru of adult education as well. But yes, Susan, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Will. And John, look, Edward Lindemann, most people don't realize, but he was a social worker, and he is known as the father of andragogy, which is the science of helping adults to learn. So when I look at these people here, you know, for me, it's a very indigenous worldview as well, is to look at the connectivity, the connections, the relationships between all of them. I mean, Jane Addams, you know, she was there present at the Highlander School, started by Miles Horton. And one of the main reasons why I gave this book to John is that, you know, a few years ago, John actually took long service leave and he went to the Appalachian Mountains to study song, the development of song and singing. And he always talked about, you know, his dream of building this community school. And I thought, aha, I know who did that, and that's Miles Horton. And so he did this, he built this Highlander School. And, you know, that was a source of quite a lot of social activism. And we try and teach that or discuss that or have conversations about that with our social work students. And the Highlander School was the genesis of also the beginnings of people's thinking, like Martin Luther King, for example, and other social activists came to the Highlander School and studied and conversed alongside Miles Horton. Paulo Freire, I just love his work and I love what he has to say. John Dewey, so the idea of critical reflection, we talk a lot with our students about this, but the best notion of how to do critical reflection for me comes from John Dewey, where it was from him who said, you know, you can't just sit in a corner, so to speak, and just navel gaze and think that you're going to become this critical reflective person. This has to happen in concert with others. And that's the whole basis of critical reflection. So conversation as experiential learning is great foundation for that. And what John was mentioning, this humanness of teaching and learning. Again, you know, it's a very indigenous way of looking at things, of thinking, being, and doing it, this reciprocal responsibility between teacher and learner. And it's not just about taking, but also giving back. And we all of us, we say to our students, you know, you don't have to talk within a communication event, but, you know, your listening is invaluable. Your participation in truth listening, where you listen viscerally with your whole body to what's going on around you, and then thinking that, yeah, I can contribute to that conversation. So that's where, you know, the humanitarianness of teaching and learning comes into this conversation as experiential learning.
And I love that one of the things with the word experience is that in my outdoor community, experience usually becomes associated to activity, I have to give you an experience where everything is an experience. And so we think about, I mean, John and I nerd out about this all the time, but walking into a stranger's therapy office for a psychotherapy session is bizarre. You look at the books, you look at the degrees on the wall, you look at the fake diagram of the brain, and you're sitting there going, what do I make of this experience? And so one of the things we really thought about when thinking about these really amazing thinkers was you don't learn from experience. We learn from critically reflecting about experience. And so that's one of the really big things is any experience, well, all experience is ongoing, you know, every experience connects to the previous experience. You can't find where one ends and one begins. But yeah, it really is so amazing that these foundational thinkers, and I don't like using those colonizing kind of patriarchal terms, like, but these people, I guess saying it the other way, these thinkers have become eclipsed in sort of the medicalization of education and mental health, where really if thinking about experiential learning was really foundational to our entire profession. Sorry, John, I cut you off.
Oh no, that was great. It was nothing.
Anyway, Susan, over to you.
Okay, well, I'm just going to continue your vein of thought and thinking there, Will, about, experience is never ending. So fundamentally, what we're talking about is lifelong learning. And that's what all of these thinkers had in mind. So, the learning happens along, lifelong learning is all about our engagement with dialectical learning, different planes of experiences and how that can add to our lifelong learning. And Paulo Freire famously talks about this idea of problematizing the world. And people think, oh, this is really wanky academic stuff. What does it mean? But all it means is just asking questions, making something into a problem, question mark. And by doing that, if we're continually asking questions and seeking answers, we are continually on that lifelong journey. And Paulo Freire, he talks famously about reading the world always precedes reading the word. He was a fabulous literacy educator as well in his country of Brazil, and but he really tapped into the experience of people. That's what was so important. I mean, John, myself, and Will, we can talk to our students till the cows come home about, technical rational stuff and how to do stuff. Well, we can, but we don't. We choose not to, because that's not our way of thinking and a way of doing things. But experience is incredibly, incredibly important. It's about being in the moment with that experience. And of course, Jane Addams is one of the most famous humanitarian thinkers. She just brought so much deep understanding of what it means to do humanitarian social work. Learning as a democratic process, John Dewey, look, his ideas are seminal. They go on and on forever. There's never an out-of-date time for John Dewey's thinking. And I liken Miles Horton's work to learning as part of a revolutionary song, because so many social activists came out of his amazing thinking and conversing during the times that he had the Highlander School. And again, learning through praxis. Praxis is intentional practice. It is purposeful practice. And we say that to students right from the beginning. You cannot practice unknowingly. So it's a double negative. It gets all of us thinking about it. It means that before we even go into a situation, we are thinking along the lines of, what can we do to add to this space? What can we do to make it better, not just for me, but for all of those people around us? And of course, praxis comes from the thinking of Antonia Gramsci, who also influenced people like Paulo Freire. And then learning through communities of inquiry, group work. Eduard Lindemann was one of the first main thinkers about how to do this kind of learning with each other. There is a resource, a link there at the bottom of this slide that connects to an article by Anne Baker, Patricia Jensen, and David Kolb, and it is called Conversation as Experiential Learning. And you know, I just love their ideas. You know, their ideas about how experience is brought into this tacit way of thinking and doing stuff. Very meaningful. I'm going to leave it at that, Will and John.
Oh, thank you, Susan. Yeah, and I love this word, democracy, that comes up, and it comes up a lot in John Dewey's work and Jane Addams' work, where what they kind of thought of social work was go out and teach the world philosophy and be around each other and mimic the perfect democracy. That if there's an issue in democracy, just do more democracy, more around each other, more being with each other, and we'll figure it out. And I mean, there was a presidential debate today, and I did not watch it, but I thought, gosh, the divided nature, instead of being around each other, not waiting for two people to tell us how to be democratic, but what if we were all around each other being democratic? John, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I also, like, when reading those works, thinking about the idea of democracy, and what I thought is often, I could be wrong, but I feel it's something we don't talk a lot about in Australia. We don't have an ongoing. I know we live in a democracy, or a liberal democracy, but yeah, but it's interesting seeing it come through as ideas as afresh in a way, and re kind of thinking about democracy. Yeah, it's something that doesn't happen, I don't think.
Yeah. So we've given sort of some of the theoretical background to all these ideas, and then what we hope is that we can show you how we've tried to take the theory and make it into the practice with our social work intensives, and that's very specific, but very much happy to talk about how these can be applied to different things. And by no means do the three of us think that we've nailed it, because like deliberate practice, you got to get better the next time that you do it. So one of the ideas when we talked about being generalist social work educators and having so many people that are interested in a range of concepts, whether it's yoga, mindfulness, the outdoors, all these different ideas that have such good therapeutic research behind them, but we don't teach them. We really want the students to bring those ideas in. And so one of the things, John and I rewrote some of our group work intensive to invite the students to work together to not only facilitate a group activity, group therapy work on their own that they're interested in, but to teach the students as well what the research is behind the activity that they're teaching. What's the theoretical perspective informing this activity? So it became a really amazing co-facilitation through conversation. And one of the coolest things that I saw was one student brought that they were going to do a couples yoga group work practice to the intensive. And I walked outside, and on the grass, all the students were lifting each other up, using their feet to put people in the air. And it looked hilarious and amazing, but they were all teaching through their own lived experience their ideas. of what was going on. Anything you want to add to that, John?
And it's amazing how many people chose to go outside, you know.
Yeah.
It's but yeah, I guess we took away a lot of the structural stuff that's often there, like when you're told to run a group or run a group work process. So we left it to them to create their own content in a sense, around the concept of group work facilitation. And because people get to be they get to create and facilitate a group, and they also get to be in a group and support others' ideas. So it's a real kind of a togetherness learning experience for everybody.
Yeah. And then John, how do you make the extracurricular the curricular?
Well, this was just something like over the years, me and Will, we'd be going out to Wagga to run the intensives, and neither of us live in Wagga. And so we're just staying there, and we'd run events straight after the lectures and the formal structure of the day. And then we'd get people to meet up. We'd have barbecues. We'd go down to the beach, and we'll show you some of this stuff. And the beach, as in Wagga Beach, that's what it's called. It's not actually, well, it is a beach, I guess, in a way. But so we thought, wow, what would happen? Like, we could get more people to get involved in this because it's so good. Everybody, you just feel this sense. Everybody is missing out on this social aspect, and or getting to know each other. How do we flip that? How do we make what we are calling extracurricular activity as the curricular? So what we did was we started our first day in the lecture, in a kind of a lecture hall, and then told everybody, okay, we're all going to meet in the square. And then in the square, we had ready a kind of a big barbecue, but unprepared. So we had a bunch of sausages, very vegetarian and gluten-free, and we kind of catered as much as we like. It was an accessible space, so everybody could go to it. And it was within the day. It was within the morning. It was the second thing we did that day after formal meetings. And in that morning, we got people to say, oh, do you want to help do the barbecue? Do you want to set up tables? So everybody got involved. And then we done these big games, kind of reflecting on some ideas from what Will has done in nature-based therapy stuff. And it was quite amazing. So, and we asked all the facilitators that were working with us, teaching the groups, you come too. You'll be paid for this because this is part of your week. So they all came, they met, and then it was I mean, you could call it an introductory barbecue, but that wasn't our focus. We left out that word. It was kind of more of a surprise and engaging. We actually call it, and we called it the social work because it's social, and it's kind of directly taken from Miles Horton, because he had an idea about doing the social work. If you don't know, if you want to get people together, sit them together at a table, let them eat together, let them do things together. Not the main thing they have to do, but these regular social things that we all do all the time. So we brought that aspect in. And then what we noticed is when we got to the so-called tutorial classrooms, people already knew each other and had a buzz. And there was none of that first meeting jitters. They were all dispersed in this kind of sort of hyperactivity that we had in the morning. And people talked about it later. They talked about, oh, it was so good. It really got us to feel connected and here. Because, years and years we've experienced turning up to this little room with our little groups. No one wants to talk. People want to leave, so it's it it just broke this thing. And I don't even want to say broke the ice, because that wasn't even the thing. We actually wanted to copy or emulate this idea of doing the social work. Yeah. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, well, one of the things I noticed from this is that what happened when we did get into those tiny tutorial rooms was that we've been encouraging people to record their deliberate practice, record the audio of their practicing sessions, record the video of it for 4 years. Many more people did it because they all felt more comfortable with each other to be engaged in the practice together. And so it's amazing. Yeah, so it was really good.
That's such a funny comment from Graham there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is funny, Graham, because we're constantly beat into us ideas of boundaries. And me and Will argue sometimes or talk to each other, and Susan, who are the boundaries protecting? Who are they for? You know?
Yeah.
We're kind of, I don't know, pushing and pulling around boundaries. Yeah.
Yeah. Jennifer and Narelle, do you want to say more about, just because to have a conversation, do you want to talk about the handcrafts that you use in your work to start building conversation?
Hi, I'll just try and turn on my, there I am.
You're right.
Sure. When we do our work with children or with adults, we find that conversation flows when our hands are busy. So we do handcrafts, we do sewing or felt making, or even weeding in the garden. We don't work in a garden along the creek side and in the bush. So when our hands are busy, then we're not really thinking about ourselves. We're engaged in a task, but we can have a conversation with someone who's next to us. It's a little bit more informal, it's a little bit more relaxed, and the sharing is different to then if we were to sit, we also sit in circles, but if we were to formally have a conversation about something, it's a little bit more forced.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I often think too, there's so many things about being an outdoor worker where when you're hiking, you're never just sat right across from a person, or if you're in a canoe, the worker is usually behind the person, and it can make for a great space to have a conversation. I don't think it's necessarily better or worse than any other conversation, but if we are going to embrace the pedagogy of experiential learning, and in the adult context, that we should be learning in adult ways as well, which is usually kind of hanging out with a purpose.
Yeah, and breaking down those notions of formal and informal, and not feeling guilty that something's informal is not as powerful as something formal or whatever, so to just, I don't know, I sometimes wonder who made up these ideas of strict rules. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is some of the stuff that we've done, John and I, where we've got the barbecue at the bottom, where I wish all of you could have seen the university operations team freak out when we said we don't want you to hire cleaners or cooks or anyone to help us with this barbecue. We got it sorted, and the students and everybody nailed it. On the top left is Wagga Beach, where we ran a group activity, ideally to try and reflect on our experience together. Felix comes most intensives and teaches drumming, and Felix is a social worker from Zimbabwe that brings all the drums, and we all drum together, and it's just great fun. And then John and I, on the bottom right, we hosted a poster presentation session. Instead of having students do a presentation where they had to publicly speak, we taught them something that happens at many conferences, like just make a great poster presentation, and we'll put it on the wall and all hang out. And as you can see from the shirt I'm wearing right now and the shirt that John is wearing right now, we had many students show up trying to look like Will and John as well. But it is one of those amazing things that we just thought being around each other outside of the lecture theater, outside of the tutorial room, we can get the most out of this experience. That the experience is mandated to us by our accrediting body, by the university, but how do we actually really bring that extracurricular in? And it's been just such a wonderful experience over the last 2 years to keep piloting this and do what we've been doing.
And also, like, even the poster presentations, we were bringing kind of like what Will said, it's a real world thing. It's what people do at conferences. And then when people did put them all up and were able to share and talk, it created that kind of buzz you do get at a kind of conference, walking around looking at posters. People could stand by their posters or explain it, or people just got to see what other people did, and it was a real buzz, rather than because they weren't marked. This was just the end process of some particular tasks that students made up, in a sense, on their own to do. So it's a kind of a celebration of the task or celebration of the experience, and then reflecting on other people's work in a kind of a joyful way, really, it seemed. Yeah.
So before we wrap up, as much as it seems like just having fun and having barbecues and going to the beach and playing drums with your students is really amazing, John, Susan, and I, we do have some thinking about this. And one of the things, I read this book called Calling Bullshit, which is an amazing book about how research is used to sell bullcrap. And one of the chapters is all about how if you make a good image, it's easier to sell your horrible idea. And I called John and I said, we should create an image to sell how much fun we have in our job with our students. And so what we tried to do is take the whole experiential, everything is circular. You have an experience, you try something, and it goes around and around, and then put that over the top of comfort zone, learning edge, and how we can all push ourselves to get out of our comfort zone. And like I said earlier, comfort zone is in many ways, it's the wrong word, where I love the idea of getting to your learning edge, getting to a place where you push yourself to try new things. And John and I, as musicians, know this, that to learn a new chord requires stretching your fingers, practicing over and over and over again. And so we came up with this idea, and it's just informed us for a really long time, that how can we make mistakes, gather feedback from our peers, but that means both students and teachers, reflect on core conditions of the work. What does it mean to work this way? And then refine and generalize, and then go for it again, and then make mistakes even further.
Yeah, and we wrap this around like ideas from our own experience of like say, as a musician, repetition is key. It's not good just to have one go of something. So when we were teaching like communication skills or interview skills or practicing those skills, we got the students to do short, sharp kind of interview at first, so they could have plenty of goes of doing the same thing. And it also made it kind of light. Will came up with this idea, hey, let's not get too heavy. Why don't we interview someone about what did you do on the weekend? you know, so they're all the same skills. It doesn't have to be something really deep and I don't know, something damaging in someone's life, you know, or it doesn't have to be based on some sort of a script. We can just use some of our own experience, some of our light experiences to practice some of those same skills. So we got people to do short, sharp, so they could practice it ongoingly, and then increase those times as the week went on. You know, and people just became more comfortable around that.
Mm. And one of the things is, I know that many of us are trained to think about a social work interview being 1 hour, but if you did 1 hour a 1 hour interview, and then you were asked to transcribe that interview with no recording, just to write down what was said, how much are you really going to get right?
Mm.
You're going to get 90% wrong. So the more 5-minute interviews you do, the more you're going to learn from your experience. It's the more repetition and practice in different contexts, different scenarios that will really bring the most of that experience. And this idea of the competency zone, this is one that I think John and I got particularly passionate about, that we have so many students that we work with who bring just a wealth of experience. They have worked in various sectors for so long. And because you're competent in something doesn't mean you're at the learning zone of something. So we wanted to really start pushing them into move beyond what you do for your job, go further, and really challenge yourself in this way.
Mm.
This slide just gets into the, and I think we should engage in a conversation for the time we have left, but
Oh, you've gone off, Will.
oh, I muted myself so Susan could talk. Susan, go ahead and say something.
You're
Sorry,
on.
I was writing something in the chat. I was just responding to what you were saying about you know, that brilliant idea, and it is a great idea, of having the short, sharp interviews, because you know that is it's not about us just again navel gazing about the things that we want to do, but we are being really responsive to the needs and expectations of practice as we see it in many organizations currently. Is, you know, I mean, I don't know of many organizations that do have the luxury of asking workers, their social workers, to conduct at least hour-long interviews. So what we're doing here with the intensives is really building and honing those skills, helping students to hone them for themselves.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
guess that's just one thing to say about the co-creation of curriculum. Well, is a lot of this giving students the choice to, you know, work on like their own projects around group work, or what they want to do around interviewing, or what they want to do in regards projects and posters, is taking away some of the structure stuff and letting the students experience and knowledge come in, so they can expand on that and get, you know, develop that further with the different people within their groups. So they kind of we create a shell of a curriculum, and then they add to that. So together we're all creating around the knowledge and the curriculum in a sense.
yeah, totally. Well, I'd love with the our friends that are here, if there are questions, I will stop sharing the screen. It would be awesome if there are questions, thoughts, how this can be applied to your work or your learning. anything like that, if anyone feels brave enough to unmute or type into the group chat, it'd be really great to hear from you as well with the 10 minutes that we have left. So Ian or Ian, sorry, I don't know which way to say it, but says about the breakdown of relationships. And I think what's really interesting is in social work education, we talk so much about boundaries and professional boundaries as if you can't go to the edge of that boundary instead of thinking maybe at the edge where we really get to know each other is where the most amazing thing happens. Instead of thinking I need to only be a teacher in the lecture theater or an educator. So I totally think you're absolutely right. And the thing with in social work, when we talk about power dynamics, we often say things like, I reduce the power differential with my clients. And this is something John and I have talked about, where I actually don't know if that's ever possible. I think you just have to acknowledge that you, the worker, has all the power. And then what you do when acknowledging you have all the power is what helps you as the worker to not take advantage of somebody else. I don't know, John, did I say that okay?
Yeah, well, it's a funny thing. Sometimes they argue we're not the expert, and then if someone wants to protect themselves, they say, "Well, I am the expert." It's just I think the power dynamics shift to protect people in a sense. So, but I think coming back to what Susan said earlier, a lot of stuff from Paulo Freire or Dewey or whatever is about humanizing the relationship. So trying to, like Freire talks about teacher, learner, learner, teacher. We're in a relation. Sometimes we're learning, sometimes we're teaching. As academics, same with students. Sometimes they're learning, sometimes they're teaching. And to accept that we're all in this kind of, and I know Susan, she loves to use the word love, a kind of a loving relationship of this. And yeah, that there are power relationships, but they shift. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just say, I think also it's what I mentioned before, and it's very much a cultural principle, this idea of reciprocity. And we talk a lot about this, we all need to develop and keep reviewing our ability and capacity to engage in reciprocal responsibility. It's that giving and taking, and it's not just a take, take, take. Yeah.
John, do you want to read the next comment about
Jennifer's?
yeah.
So much of this applies to our work, especially with children. We work with birth to 12. We have so many reflective conversations individually on the track with children, but also as a group. We try to facilitate sociocratic conversations in our groups so they are not deferring to us as adults. We are curious about their experience and ideas and trying to help them understand that we can learn from them too. We are curious together. Wow, we talked an awful lot about this in the last intensive. The notion of curiosity.
Yeah.
I mean, in reflecting on like interviewing or just in group work, like curiosity is one of the big notions that can help conversations.
Yeah, and it's funny that even John and I, as being massive nerds about this, that we think about Carl Rogers' core conditions of change. It's kind of funny that curiosity is not really one of them.
Oh, Will's breaking down. or I am.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can hear Will.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, it's you, John. We that it's always really interesting that curiosity is not kind of a core condition of change. And one thing I've taught a bit about is we have killer Ds, which are diagnoses, disorders, deficiencies. That list goes on forever, disabilities, and crucial Cs, curiosity, courage, capabilities. And so in many ways, embracing curiosity in many ways can embrace engagement. It's a bringing into the process. It's bringing people into the learning or the therapy or what it is that you're doing. So I really love anything that people do that brings the curiosity into the process. I think is just so wonderful.
I love that
And
comment made by is it Jennifer? And I'd love a bit more unpacking about that, where they write, we try to facilitate sociocratic conversations in our groups so they are not deferring to us as adults. Narelle, are you able to, Narelle, did you write that? Did you expand a little bit on that?
No, Jennifer did. We
Oh,
work
okay.
together. We're the co-directors together.
Right, okay.
You can chat about it.
Oh, yeah, I just, there you are, Jennifer.
Hello. So the position, you know, in the field of early childhood, often there's a teacher educator up here and there's children here. We don't like to do that. We like to say that we're nature mentors because it makes us more, where's my video there? It makes us more even. So like Will said, we learn from you, you learn from us. Sometimes we're teaching, sometimes we're listening. It's a respectful relationship. And I think what Jen has said there is so true. We try and help the children to understand that their view is just as important as our view. So in a group decision-making time, everybody has a say, and working sociocratically can take a long time to make decisions. When you're on a track and you say to the group, should we go this way or that way? Should we have lunch now or in 10 minutes?
Especially with 15 4-year-olds.
So it can take a long time, but it's helping them to learn the process and to learn the value of listening to each other and to negotiate decisions. And, you know, Jen and I are there as the adults to make safety decisions. There's no doubt about that. But when it comes to decisions that we don't mind either way, it doesn't matter. But you guys, it does matter too. You want to play for 10 minutes longer, or you want to go to the next place where there's a sliding down waterfall and we can all slide down it? Who wants to do that? Who wants to negotiate their turn to talk first about the sit spot that we do? There's negotiations that happen and bargains that are made and things that need to be remembered for next week. And these are life skills. These are really important and really good. And we practice it from young ages.
And there aren't many opportunities for these children throughout the week to actually have a say in decisions that happen around them throughout the week. You know, little children are whisked from, well, in school children are whisked from here, there and everywhere. When you go to school, there's this thing, you're going to do this. There's the timetable. There's, you know, there's very little opportunity to voice your opinions throughout the day for children. So we really like to be able to provide a space where their opinion is heard and respected, discussed if they want it to be discussed, or just listened to if they don't want to have their opinion discussed, and where they can object to something and not be shut down. So yeah, those are the kind of conversations we like to have with children.
And we
It
even
does
talk
it does
about-
mean we spend a lot of time not doing anything other than having a conversation, but we're okay with that. And so are the children, apparently. So that's all good.
we even
Well, I
talk
think
about
I
the
think
difference between democracy and sociocracy, and they get it. They're for and they get it.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting is there are so many times where I don't know if it's the way that we were taught, educated, or trained, that there are times that we think that just talking can is a slippery slope to not doing anything. And I think it's all doing something. It's all being together, being around each other, this and that. And I think yeah, I think it sounds amazing. And giving children the opportunity to make choices is how we build. I mean, if any complex trauma occurs from no choice, what we should be doing is just giving children the chance to make choices over and over again so that they can feel like they can make choices. So I love it.
Well, I just want to, can I just recognize
Yes.
and acknowledge Graham's great
Oh, yeah.
thought there. Yet you are describing being human, not the idea of being humane. I love that, being human. Thank you for that.
Totally. And I read this really great quote from Paulo Freire. Like, to alienate human beings from their own decision making is to change them into objects. And that's when you think of that idea of pouring education into a vessel, it's just an object. You're pumping something. You're not looking for any response back. There's no reciprocal, there's no relationship. So it really sounds like from your work with children, it sounds like the same thing. Like, we had someone else talk about children last night. And the idea is, like, sometimes I'm thinking, gosh, why do we separate these things from teaching adults and teaching children? It seems like the same thing in a way, like the same need, the same need for relationships or those notions of decision making, how important they are to your own learning. Yeah.
Great stuff.
Yeah. Well, with that, we'll probably just give Susan the last word. Susan, what would you like to say?
Oh, I just think that it's just invaluable, the information that's being shared tonight or in this seminar. I do want to have another think about a few things that have been raised, and so we'll have another conversation, Will and John. But yeah, thank you so much. It's just another deeper level of seeing the power of conversation to augment learning and teaching, and the way that we help the science of helping adults and children to learn, and in the process we learn ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Susan.
Yeah. And John, we have more work to do because we still haven't convinced Susan to dress like you and me, and so we'll figure that out eventually.
That's a good thing.
I know I'm the balance. I'm balancing the palette here. I'm the neutral.
Okay. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for another wonderful discussion this week, and I really appreciate you all coming, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, John, everybody.
Good night.